Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Chet, and I'm here for another conversation for the Free Will Project. This time, I'm here with my friend Roy. Roy, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and maybe give us a little bit of information about your background?
Yes, thanks for having me. Well, my name is Roy Becker. I'm from the Netherlands. I study applied psychology right now. And yeah, I got very much interested in the free will debate as soon as I became aware that it was a thing. Um, and yeah, just read up on a lot of stuff. And that's how I came into this, basically.
Cool, cool. Let's see. Can you tell us a little bit about how you came to the perspective you currently have? And it doesn't have to be like a, day by day account of you
Right,
thinking, but just, overview of like,
right.
maybe where you started at and like who influenced you along the way.
Sure. Yeah, I guess uh, from conversations I kind of come at this from yeah, not so common angle because the topic of free will didn't cross my mind at all for most of my life, I guess. I mean, I was raised sort of very loosely Christian, um, and yeah, the belief in free will was sort of is so much of a given that yeah, I didn't know people questioned that. So that's where I started out. But I always felt some weird difference in how people report about their experience. And I just thought I was overthinking it pretty much. And I just dropped it and never thought about it. Um, then I came across this video by Susan Blackmore, UK psychologist, um, who said she didn't believe in free will, and she sort of explained what that meant, and how also on the subjective aspect, she didn't really feel this sense of free will that most people seem to report having. And that really interested me because that sort of felt like, hey, that's sort of like me. I also don't get that thing. Um, and then I just figured out that it was a whole debate, and it was the biggest debate in philosophy. And so I never heard of any of this. Um,
It's been going for thousands of years.
yes,
It's
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
it's kind of amazing that something like that can be happening like in the human culture overall, and so many of us are like clueless to it that we're
yes,
doesn't even.
yes, and also, yeah. Later I found out that Einstein was a determinist, and various other people that I've always already admired, um, even when I was still a Christian. And yeah, what was sort of interesting was not only was it sort of the biggest debate in philosophy, but also it was sort of getting more popular again now. And um, yeah, during the time where I found that Susan Blackmore video, it already came to my attention again, this free will thing. And um, yeah, there was a point where I thought, hey, I might be actually crazy. I might be missing something. But then I found out that there's not only more free will skeptics, but that there is a huge group of people in philosophy, but also in neuroscience, who are skeptical of free will. And I was like, okay, maybe I'm not crazy, or at least not for this reason,
Yeah, it could be
um,
something else.
yeah. And then I found, Sam Harris and Greg Caruso and Trick Slattery, and these were all people, who actively are writing about free will. And yeah, that's how I got into the topic. And yeah, I just find it deeply interesting. It's just, yeah, in my area of stuff I'm very curious about. So.
Yeah, I think all those people have influenced me now, and I know particularly Trick and Greg are like relatively new people to me, which I'm very impressed with both of them. They're very clear like thinkers and communicators, and they address a lot of subtle problems that often people talk past each other on. They will like go really specific and really
Yeah,
strongly on something that often gets missed. Um, and Susan Blackmore is just so much fun. Like she's all over the place, and she's such a thoughtful person. Like uh, my own background, which I'm sure I've mentioned probably more than once, is in anthropology and religious studies, and I found that a lot of people that uh, are like either skeptical of religion or free will or things like that. A lot of times they ignore the subjective experience or the subjective element of experience. Of course, that's not universal, but I feel like Sue, with her like background in like parapsychology, which is a funny place to start, she really gives like the subjective experience like the time and thought it deserves, and
absolutely.
really her ability to connect like the subjective with the objective is super impressive to me. So it's one of those.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I just I really
Yeah.
appreciate her. I appreciate everyone you mentioned there. And
Yeah, yeah, me too, for sure, man. She's also sort of a hero in the skeptic community because of her 30 years in parapsychology. Because now we have someone who actually believed in the paranormal, who researched it thoroughly for 30 years and didn't find anything. So that's sort of interesting information.
yeah, those
Yeah.
stories are always the most interesting ones, where you get that kind of inside view on someone's like transition from kind of one paradigm to another.
A lot of this also happened with Libet, by the way. Since we're talking about free will,
Oh yeah,
Libet
interesting.
was a libertarian and I believe a dualist. Also, I'm not entirely sure about that, but his experiments were designed to prove uh, that free will was a thing, kind of, and then the data was other than hypothesized. Um, so yeah, that's also that was interesting. How that went. Curious how that must have been like.
Yeah, yeah, that's fascinating. I imagine there's some cognitive dissonance that goes along with that. Um, you mentioned Greg Caruso, and
That's
I kind
right.
of wanted to take like a little detour here and go into his whole public health model, which I have my mind wrapped around like the kind of general concept,
Right.
but I don't know how much of the specifics I'm missing. But if you could go into that a little bit, um, I'm
I
I'm
can, I can try.
I'm super interested in
Right. Yeah.
the
I
practical implications of this
Right.
conversation.
Right. Yeah. And I think the Justice Without Retribution network would be a place to start. Justicewithoutretribution.com is a website with some basic information about what that project is all about. Um, Definitely that's a place to start. But yeah, Greg Caruso also, together with Derek Peterboom, have written extensively about all the implications of free will skepticism, not only on the justice system, but also on creativity, the implications of just from every angle, because there's just so many misconceptions about how deeply wired free will is into everything. um because you've probably heard all kinds of things like without free will you can't have reason, or without free will you can't have creativity, or you can't have meaning, or you can't have any justice system, and you should just let all the criminals roam free. These are all the misconceptions that go to a person's mind the first time they hear about free will skepticism. So yeah, many free will skeptics out there have done their best to address all of those points.
Yeah, and meanwhile, I've never actually heard a free will skeptic like advocating for those positions. These seem to be just like
Right,
these seems to be just like bad assumptions people have about the position in their ignorance of it. So
right.
it's not like I don't know anyone that's like, no, we need to like just let violent people be violent.
Yeah,
Like that's I'm not
yeah.
aware of that position, but that's
No, me neither.
yeah, no, almost every time this conversation like comes up in public, someone will say that. It's like, "Oh, so what you
Right.
mean?" Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah. But yeah, the public health quarantine model is developed by Greg Caruso, and it goes into how to have a justice system without this moral anger and retribution that we now often see. And it depends on where the particular justice system is, on how punitive the particular society is. But it's a thing that, yeah, it's basically in a lot of places right now where it just shouldn't be, because yeah,
yeah, no.
if you accept the free will skeptic position, of course, then a lot of the things of how we're doing right now are simply bad. And we should
Oh yeah. No, that's one where I interact with people who consider themselves to be like, scientific minded and rational and whatnot.
right,
And I have a hard time articulating um exactly how like irrational our current justice system is. And
right.
I
And
imagine
also, you know, when you're talking about free will skepticism and the implications and something like the quarantine model, um, like the quarantine part is very straightforward. If someone has a very contagious disease, um, we feel no problem in quarantining them. We feel justified in quarantining them to keep the rest safe.
I felt
Um,
I felt very confident about that position until COVID hit America. And now I'm like, oh God, we're in trouble. We're in trouble.
yeah, right, 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 right.
No, that's an aside. That doesn't matter.
Right, right, right. Yeah, but the point, um, normally speaking, we would feel completely justified in quarantining people to keep others safe.
Right.
Um,
Absolutely.
but you can apply that same justification to a sociopath with holding an axe.
Right.
You can be afraid of him. That's rationally justified as a free will skeptic, because he's still a guy with an axe.
Who apparently doesn't have any feelings about hurting you with it.
Yeah,
But
and who
I
is
mean,
who is on
assumedly,
who is on his way this very second towards you, right? So it's you have to take it seriously.
yeah, I'd like someone to restrain that individual, please.
Yes, and we don't need to attribute free will to this person to do those things. That's in short what it is. And also the thing is, um, there's two views. There's no punishment or except for keeping others safe and rehabilitation. But if you could prove the causal efficacy of certain types of punishment, then that's perfectly fine, a discussion that you can have even with a free will skeptic.
Yeah,
But
I'm definitely open to hearing about like, evidence on that one. I
yeah,
tend to fall on the no punishment side of things because I can't make sense of it. But and this is one of the things that I hear from compatibilists sometimes is that like,
right,
well, punishment is almost like conditioning, and certain types of punishment might be effective in reducing certain behaviors. And just from the interaction I've had with the evidence, I don't really believe that. But like you said, it's a conversation that can be had.
yeah,
And if there's evidence otherwise, I mean,
yes,
and
exactly. Yeah, that's just the point I want to make, because if someone presents that evidence next week, this is just a cushion in there. That would be no, in my view, that wouldn't be incompatible with being a free will skeptic.
right,
but I agree with you that also what I learned is that punishment helps if that punishment is constantly there. If and once you take it away, then
Yeah.
the behavior you're trying to correct for immediately returns often.
Um, Especially like in the last conversation I had, I don't know if this is like a perfectly good comparison, but I compared prison time to like spanking children. And my understanding, yeah, you're gonna laugh, but I'm in the US. Like
Right,
we love spanking children, and my daddy did it to me and I'm gonna do it to my son, and that's the way it ought to be, and there's nothing wrong with it, except for all the evidence that shows that like increases aggression, and
right,
it doesn't increase any sort of compliance other than like in the immediate term, like you were saying,
right. Yeah.
once the
No,
threat of
I tend to
punishment is
side with that too.
yeah.
But yeah. So
Yeah, that's a difficult conversation to have in the US as well. I hope I'm not working off of stereotypes, but I assume you have a different situation in the Netherlands where it's the spanking is not like the norm, or it's less common,
no,
or
it's definitely not the norm, I would say. I think it happens.
yeah.
Obviously it happens, but um yeah, I think it really depends, though. I think it still happens. I don't know, maybe I was lucky and I'm biased in that way, but it's definitely not the norm at all.
That's my understanding in Europe generally, is that there's been a lot of like progress made on that front. And we still have a lot of convincing to do. I think the vast majority of parents in the U.S. Use physical punishment against their children, and yeah, it doesn't. As far as I know, the evidence is that you're doing your child a big disfavor. Like
Yeah,
you're really setting them up for a more troubled path
yeah,
through the and like I said, I don't know if it's you can really compare them in a one-to-one sense, but like I'm a big fan of the psychologist James Gilligan. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's done a lot of difficult work with people who have done like uh, very hardcore crimes that uh, would would give you nightmares. And he's worked with them directly, and helped a lot of people improve their lives from very difficult places. And this is one of the claims he makes, is that punishment doesn't stop people from being violent. It actually like encourages the violence, and that's in
right.
adults as well. So
It depends on also what the punishment is, but yeah, like you know, certain punishments, definitely some that I see happening in the US. I don't know to what degree that happens in the Netherlands, but for an example, solitary confinement
yeah,
is just a very crazy psychological experiment they're doing on people, basically, because evidence has shown that just 3 days in such an environment can lead to serious neurological damage. It's a very serious thing to put someone through. And it's often seen as sort of the punishment, the ultimate punishment you get in prisons, right? It's sort
right.
of like what happens if you do something bad in prison, then they put you there. And yeah, that in from a free will skeptic point of view, that's just a very strange and painful thing to do.
Yeah, one might call it cruel and unusual, which is supposed to be
Yeah,
against the law here, and yet we do
yeah,
it.
yeah, and imagine also, I don't know who said it. Someone pointed out that even in the most horrible prison, solitary confinement is still sort of the worst thing that you can do to someone in there. That's why it's sort of used as that type of punishment. So, you know, this socially isolating a person and just removing all stimuli from that's not how you're gonna make this person any better. you
Yeah,
know,
there's
is just
no
gonna come out of there, you know, even more, uh, yeah, screwed up than he was before he went in there. It's just,
you're not rehabilitating anyone that way.
it's
it's
the opposite.
yeah.
It's actually the exact opposite of rehabilitation. And as a free will skeptic, if you look at that, life's lottery is not fair in the sense that a lot of people believe it is.
Hmm.
That is just a very That's just a very cold and weird situation you're in if you look at that, you know.
It's really taking someone that's drawn, the short straw, and like cutting that straw even more, like just like just like
Exactly.
making things even worse. It's yeah, and our recidivism rate in the US like testifies to that. Like we have a terrible recidivism rate, and it's because I mean, like one of my favorite philosophers, Kropotkin, pointed out, prisons are the universities of crime. Like we send people there to become criminals,
Yeah.
and we get what we pay for. So when people come out, there's a good chance of them going right back.
Right. Exactly.
And that's not an individual person making some choice about their life. Statistically, it is a feature of our system. It's how the structure operates when you put any type of humans in that situation.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. What Greg Caruso, his model adds, besides quarantining people and rehabilitating them, is also, um, this free will skeptic perspective is a reason to put your money and resources in preventing the crimes from happening in the first place.
absolutely.
And that's a thing he also underscores in some of his talks, which I think is very important, next to having a more humane way of rehabilitating and quarantining dangerous people. um, and the movement from hating them because they're evil, towards fearing them because they're dangerous and quarantining them to keep others safe. Um, in addition, trying to prevent looking at the causes of criminal behavior and trying to prevent those situations from occurring in the first place. I think those are all very good ways of thinking about this. And that's why I think that even if you're not a free will skeptic, I think that the free will skeptic position and the things various free will skeptics have wrote, they're still very interesting, even if you're not convinced that free will, as most people would say, it exists as an illusion. I still think that what free will skeptic philosophers have to say can still be of great value.
Oh yeah. A lot of these conclusions you can come to independent of the free will discussion. I mean, like, and I think this is one thing that validates the position of free will skeptics, is that the conclusions that they come to are often conclusions that are supported by other lines of empiricism. And so you don't necessarily have to adopt a free will skeptic point of view to see value in the public quarantine model. Um,
Exactly.
but it helps.
Yeah, it helps. It definitely does help. Yes.
It helps. I think it helps with clarity around understanding human behavior generally. I mean, I guess that's kind of an obvious thing to say, but I see so many people that when they're reasoning through their understanding of someone's behavior, it always, like, the buck stops at the individual.
Right.
And that's just, my understanding through, anthropology and biology and other fields, is that, like, is the behavior is not really about individuals. It's about, like, this interaction between our dispositions and the situations we find ourselves in. And so the power I see that we have to shape behavior comes from better understanding how those situations, those environments, influence individuals. And what free will skepticism leads me to is wanting to design optimal environments so that we reduce problematic behavior to the minimal amount that just maybe some amount inherently exists in human biology. And I don't think we know that. But maybe there is some minimal amount, but we could cut it down to like next to nothing, I believe. And I think you have evidence for this when you compare, different countries, their, outcomes in like, murder rates and, various offenses, various social ills. There's nothing really biological, or maybe I should say physiological. I don't know. There's nothing, in our genes or whatever that really explains the different outcomes that you have, wide variety of outcomes across populations. And so you would want to understand like what's the differences between those environments and how we can, I don't know, maybe pick the best elements from the best situations and put those together and test that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm really optimistic about the power of the environment to shape behavior. And so far, my understanding of biology is that that's where it's at. And a lot of that, I've kind of had that feeling for a long time, but recently going through, excuse me, Robert Sapolsky's Behave, uh, reinforced a lot of that thinking for me. And he's not, a lot of people hear things like what I'm saying and they think like, oh, you're talking about the blank slate and, you know, uh, behaviorism, and you can take a baby and turn it into whatever you want. And that's not what I mean. But it does seem that the environment has like huge regulatory influence on who we become. And
Yes.
I think we got to take full advantage of that, before we ever start judging other people's behaviors. But
Yes.
of course, in my personal life, I'm not consistent with that because that's really hard. I still judge people left and right, and all
Sure.
I
Yeah. That's also a big, that might be good that you brought that last thing up, because
yeah.
that's also a big misconception, is that, especially for people like Susan Blackmore or Sam Harris, and I also run into it occasionally, um, is when people mistake what you mean when you say you don't feel this feeling of free will. Um, and that's always been a sort of an interesting thing for me, and also interesting to see what Susan writes on it, because she also writes on it like, yeah, some people think I'm crazy because I don't feel this freedom of the will that um, seems to be so normal and so the norm, um, but yeah, but that's the thing. It doesn't have to be that way. One of the most common things I hear in the free will debate is, well, but we still always act as if we have free will, or you can't live without it, or you
I
have
feel
to be a schizophrenic, or
I feel like that's like how Jordan Peterson will tell like someone like Sam Harris, like, actually you do believe in God. You do act as if God exists or something. And it's like, I don't think Sam Harris believes in God. Like I take him at his word. Like I think he's genuinely an atheist.
right.
And I think it's a weird defense to have to insist that the other side agrees with you even when they're saying they don't. That
Or
to me,
that they have some psychological issue for why they say the things that they say,
right.
or if they, or they say it because they just want to push their theory, right?
Yeah, you're acting in bad faith. Your motivations are impure, and it's like
Yeah.
that in itself seems to be like a bad faith argument.
Yeah, that to me that kind of sounds like I really don't have a strong argument against what you're saying, and that's the thing that I run into is often, um, the free will skeptics, the people who come into this like, I know free will is real, right?
Yeah.
It's sort of weird to, and even free will skeptics who really have this subjective experience of feeling like they have free will, right? for me, it's sort of interesting to see where that is, or where in their thought process or in their action comes this ultimate freedom where they could have done something else, right? Or you know or where they can choose otherwise than they do in the moment. Like, where does it come in? How does it feel? Like, subjectively, that's interesting to me. But second, it's also interesting, like, if you think free will exists in the libertarian sense, where is it? What mechanism? And there already it sort of hurts my brain, because if it has a mechanism, right? Or, you know what I mean? Like, it's just difficult to conceptualize what's even being talked about. And I think that might be a bit of a misconception too, that there is this very clear idea of free will that everyone knows,
Yeah,
and there is this very clear idea of determinism. But I feel like the idea of free will is not that clear. And you know what I mean? And you don't have to be a determinist to be a free will skeptic either, right? So,
right.
and those two things are sometimes overlooked, perhaps.
No, I think that's a great point. Um, and I have a thought here. I'm going to try to run with it, but so
Go ahead.
so what I so personally, I've been through several kind of worldview shifts between like having a different view on like religion or economics or politics than I had at a previous time. And I've noticed similarities between these shifts where like it seems like certain patterns of thought occur each time. And to me, a lot of this is people's attachment to metaphor. I'm kind of going off of some of what George Lakoff talks about when he talks about how basically our worldviews are kind of stacks of metaphors, and they're built up from the notion of embodied cognition. That like your brain and your nervous system is inside a body, and it has these like immediate experiences, and then it builds like levels of abstraction on top of those. And so eventually you get so abstract that you're talking in these like really big metaphors like free will or God or capitalism or these really high order concepts that we know, well, I mean, some of us know, don't exist in like the literal ways in which a lot of people maybe naively assume they exist.
They're very crude shorthands.
Exactly. That's a great way of putting it.
Right.
And so I feel like a lot of times free will is one of these big abstractions that people don't know what they mean whenever they say it. A lot of times, if you ask people what they mean by God, it's a very abstract concept that
Right.
they don't really know what they mean by it, and I think it's one of these reasons why it's seen as like a fundamental mystery to a lot of people. Um, or if you've ever listened to an economic debate on what people mean by capitalism, like holy shit, everyone's got their different opinion. and
Right.
and so like we've built up these large metaphors, and we get really emotionally attached to them, and they help us
Mm-hmm.
navigate the world. And
Yeah.
so in a way, they have utility. um, so it creates a problem whenever someone comes along and says like, hey, your metaphor is not accurate. You're actually you're not modeling the world as accurately as I'm modeling the world. Like that's
Right.
kind of a threatening thing to say.
Yeah.
um, and I think
And
that's
next to that, there's also a semantic aspect, in the sense that whatever you're communicating now, the way that sounds, it doesn't comport with the rest we know,
right,
right?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it becomes really difficult to make progress on like the higher order issues. And I think that's where a lot of these extreme defenses come out. Like, well, if you don't believe in the absolute libertarian version of free will, well, then you are a fatalist. And why don't you just stay in bed and let everything happen because it's going to happen anyways. And
Right.
which um, one of the things I like Sam Harris for pointing out is like you can't do that anyways. Like
Yeah.
you couldn't. It would
Yes.
be very difficult to live as like a real like pure fatalist. At least I
Right.
feel like I don't know. Maybe someone's out there doing it, but uh,
I don't think it's, I just think it's, um, I just think it's inconceivable because fatalism, as I understand it, if I get run over by a train tomorrow at 3 o'clock, that's bound to happen, even if I stay in bed, right? And I just don't, I can't even imagine a universe in which that's the case, right?
right.
But then again, the same thing is with the free will thing. Is like, yeah, we are autonomous beings. We're humans. We're biological organisms. But we have a will. We certainly have wills, but none of it is free in the libertarian sense, in an ultimate sense.
Yeah,
And
you're not really authoring your will. You
right,
don't
and
choose
what
your
you
desires or
exactly,
there's plenty of people that would if they were literally free to just select their desires, they would select a completely different set of desires because the desires they have currently are
yeah,
messing with their life and messing with their quality of life. So it's like,
yeah,
yeah, the libertarian, the swing all the way from fatalism to libertarianism doesn't make any sense either.
no,
So yeah, I don't, maybe now since we're getting into a little bit of terminology, I know
yeah,
we don't want to go too heavy on this, but maybe we should talk about hard determinism and hard
right.
incompatibilism.
Sure. Yeah. I think it's good that you brought those terms up, and um, yeah, that's basically all the point. Everything you just said, I agree, and that's sort of how I came to my own position in the free will debate. Because once I knew about the free will debate and talked to people about it, and I really didn't take any position. I just looked at everything and at first I sort of became a determinist because that was the first term that came up, and I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That's like, um, and then later I sort of became more agnostic because I figured out, and this is just my reasoning for why I hold the position that I hold. I can't speak for hard incompatibilists in general, obviously, but I am just not good enough of a physicist to say anything sensible about determinism or indeterminism or what's actually the case.
Right.
I've spoken
The quantum world is weird.
I've spoken to people who say 100% indeterminism is nonsensical and can't exist, and and other people say no, we know for a fact that that there's probabilistic elements in quantum mechanics, I'm not a physicist. I'm gonna leave that to physicists to figure out. And that's sort of how I stopped being a hard determinist. It's just because, dude, I don't know. Like, it makes a lot of sense to me. Like, determinism makes a lot of sense to me, but yeah, I just don't feel qualified. I don't feel like I have enough information to have a strong leaning towards determinism or indeterminism. And then I got into various people who say that quantum indeterminism can get you free will, right? Which is also a view that's out there. And
Yeah,
I
that
don't know
one
where
makes me.
I don't know where I heard it first. If it was probably Derek Peterboom or Sam Harris who said, "Well, but do you have any control or art or authorship in any sense about these indeterministic quantum fluctuations?" And I was like, well, no. So that sort of permanently closed the door for me on that as well.
Yeah, I don't see how that
Um,
gets you any kind of libertarian action or anything like that. It
right,
doesn't follow
and
for
then
me.
Yeah, and then when I met Trick Slattery and also read more of what Jack Berenbaum had written, I figured out that that makes me a hard incompatibilist, is because, yeah, I think determinism doesn't leave any room for the free will that I think is important, that gets you the, the moral responsibility in the just desert sense. And indeterminism, I can't find a way to place myself sort of in that view where it feels like it's up to me now, because I don't control any of these quantum indeterminism effects. So, and then sort of if you even would tune that dial in between them, determinism and indeterminism, there's just no way where I can put libertarian free will back in the basket there.
Right.
So yeah, so it sort of becomes either way, it doesn't matter how the fundamental nature of reality works for me. It doesn't affect my position anymore, and if it's deterministic or not.
Yeah, either way,
Um,
free will doesn't seem to have too much meaning unless it's some kind of like floating metaphor for just you moving through your life, which is kind
right.
of how I see compatibilism. Is again, you have those like high order metaphors, and it free will seems to have some sort of, as a metaphor, seems to have some sort of utility for some people. Um, but for me personally, I don't feel that need. So yeah, I was first exposed to hard incompatibilism through the No Free Will Facebook group that you're in and that Trick is in, and uh, I it took me a little while to kind of wrap my head around it, and it occurred to me at some point, it's like, I think this is what I've been talking about all along. I just didn't have the word for it. And I know earlier we were talking a little bit before we hit record, and I think you were saying this is kind of a newer term, as far like, the conversation's thousands of years old, and yet we're still kind of discovering aspects of it. And
Yeah, it's from what I know is that hard incompatibilism is sort of a development of the last few centuries or something. Um, and that's why it's the lesser known position. Also, hard incompatibilism is a bit of a mouthful. That might also be a bit of the reason, but yeah, it's for me, it's the strongest position in the debate. If I want to go about specific positions, the hard incompatibilist position um, is also a stronger free will skeptic position, in the sense that even if determinism turns out to be false, um, there's still no free will in this view. And I think, and it was Dirk Beerbohm who coined the term hard incompatibilism. Um, and yeah, it's sort of a recent, relatively recent development. Um, but it's the position that I found suits my views about free will the most.
yeah, I think the people that I've been exposed to that are putting forth that position seem to be the ones that like communicate all the details the clearest. Whereas like a lot of times other positions will talk past each other, and I think that's one reason why the conversation's so old and unresolved. Is
Right,
like we were saying, the positions themselves aren't always very clear, and what one person means by a given term is not the same thing as the next.
right.
Um,
Especially by, when we're talking about subjects that are, a bit less tangible than others. It's just it's like when we're talking about things like free will, or even things like God and stuff like that. It's also, there is a bigger chance of, when you talk about it with someone, you think you're talking about the same thing, but you might be talking about completely different ideas. You just have the same word for it, right?
right. Yeah, you're not
And
talking about like like a car engine that's like immediately in front of
Yeah,
you, and you have like clear evidence. If you're not talking about the same thing, like you get different, you it's a technical construct, and so you get different outcomes that are like, providing immediate feedback if you're not agreeing on the meanings of words. But you get into this high order philosophical stuff, and people can go
right.
their whole lives with different definitions and never really understanding like the disagreements, properly. Or it's a I've probably used the word abstract too many times already, but yeah, it's really abstract.
Yeah. Yes, it exactly is. And that's also um why there's so many confusions about it. That's where it comes from. And I think um Sam Harris pointed out once that um perhaps the durability of this idea of free will in philosophy also has to do with um, lots of people really feeling like they have this experience of free will, but you
Hmm.
just can't square it with the world of causes, regardless of determinism or indeterminism.
Right.
Um, but a view that Sam Harris talks about in his lecture about his book, and a view that I was sort of hesitant of, but I'm sort of really sort of playing with that view right now, is that um, first of all, I'm highly skeptical of the feeling of free will being very deeply wired into our DNA. Um, I'm very skeptical of that view, that's the case.
Right.
Um, I don't think there's a free will gene. I don't think it was that insanely adaptive. It might have been a useful heuristic to have, like you touched on earlier, where you said like these are sort of robust shortcuts to sort of create a model of the world.
Right. Like we know, our brains uh, create a sort of synthetic model of the world around us, that we're not actually like reacting to the raw data of the universe around us, because like the brain just couldn't handle it, and so it
Right, and we use a lot of abstract symbolism, symbols, and stuff like that to
right.
talk about stuff. And yeah, and what Harris said, which I think he might be correct in, but it's sort of a bit of a controversial view, is that the illusion of free will, so this feeling of being in control of your thoughts and actions, and being identified um, with them, um, that might just be a misapprehension, in the sense that most people feel identified with and in control of one particular pattern of information in their conscious mind.
Right.
And that just might be a mistaken assumption, rather than this deeply ingrained illusion that we just can't help but dispense of.
No, I very much agree with this, and kind of for the reasons that, like I mentioned earlier, like I've been through like a number of worldview shifts over my lifetime, which has not been that long. And one of these patterns that I notice is that um, things that are just unquestionably true can turn out to be entirely metaphorical, and have no sort of what you might call like ontological reality, or uh,
Right.
they are they are entirely metaphor, and maybe not the best metaphor for navigating like
Right.
the world. Like there's
At least maybe not present, not today.
right.
Perhaps they might have been useful, but that could still mean that they're very disruptive uh, today in our modern
Yeah,
society.
just in the same way that we get a lot of diseases in our body because our nervous systems aren't really adapted to the stress of modern day society. They're adapted to, the environments that we experienced, tens or hundreds of thousands of years ago,
Yes,
where
yes,
a little burst of stress would save your
yes,
life. But now we live in environments of constant stress, and it really eats away at our body. And it's
yeah,
so, I think
yeah,
in the same way, oh, sorry, I think in the same
yeah,
way, memes can also be just as maladaptive.
right.
And so like we can yeah, yeah, basically, like, certain metaphors that are just like really blatantly obvious, like we should still question those. Like, I mean, there's no such thing as common sense, really.
Absolutely. And even if it's not 100%, a metaphor, as if it, it's also a subjective feeling people report to
Mhm.
have. Um, History has shown that it's possible for, the entire population of humans on Earth to be vastly mistaken about something very basic about your subjective experience. Most people who have ever existed in history have lived out their entire lives without noticing the optic blind spots that we have in our visual field.
That's a good example.
So those people have lived out their lives completely taken in by the illusion of the full, immediate, constant visual field. Um, but now science has shown that it's not that. And with a simple experiment, just blocking one eye and moving your thumb a little bit to, then you can find your optic blind spot, and then you can see your thumb disappear.
Right.
And the illusion of the full visual field is immediately gone like that.
Yeah.
And then you can go on about, how color works, and
Yeah.
um, how information from the visual system seems to come in instantly, right? So if you're
Mhm.
playing ping pong, most people would say, I see the ball coming, I determine where I'm going to hit the ball, then I hit the ball. But we know from neuroscience that this is impossible. Before the visual perception information has reached visual cortex, the hand has already done it. It goes way faster than that.
Oh yeah.
So there have been many aspects of our subjective experience which felt a certain way, which turned out physiologically, just factually, not to be the case. And free will could just be another one of those,
Oh
where
yeah.
we think it's a certain way, but it's not.
Yeah, and I think the way you connected the way metaphors interact with our system of feeling, our nervous system, and our other physiological features. I think this is why those metaphors are so convincing to us, is that you really do feel like they're real. Like, and it's hard to tell yourself that something you feel might not actually be the case. That's
Right.
just that sort of subjective evidence is one of the strongest things to overcome, to realize that that's actually not good evidence. And it's like, yeah, but I feel it. Like, I mean, how,
Right.
it's
Right. But next to the point of having good evidence, just subjectively, do you maybe feel that it's also perhaps a symptom of maybe there being sort of a cultural blind spot when we're talking about introspection? Because what you just said, like people can't even imagine that what they really feel might be wrong, right? And it's also sort of like almost you're saying you're infallible, like you don't even have to go look, right? And what I think isn't, even if you're very much convinced about your feelings and your experience right now, I still think it would be very interesting for people to investigate and to double check if they really feel if they really feel like that. And yeah, many people have said that there's various ways to perhaps experience yourself in different ways. There's meditation, but there's also more, pharmacologically induced states that can make you see that your experience can be vastly different from what it normally is. And it's like, go investigate it. Like, do you really feel this like you're this ultimate decision maker of your choices and action? And where is that feeling, and what does it feel like? Where is it? What does it do? I'm interested in hearing it,
Absolutely.
right? Like, I'm very much interested in people's experience of this.
Oh yeah.
But I'm sort of like, I never had this strong sense of I'm fully in control of my thoughts and actions to an ultimate sense in which some people report. So for me, it's sometimes even a bit hard to imagine what it is they're describing to me, where that convincing feeling comes in. And a second point I wanted to make is, in the free will debate, lots of people completely, continuously repeat, it's a very convincing illusion. It's so compelling. It's so deeply compelling. Like, people keep saying this, and I wonder if those people really did their best job to really investigate this illusion and see if it's really that compelling to the extent that they think it's compelling.
Right. Like I agree that, like, yeah, obviously I don't think they're lying, right? I think it's compelling to them.
Yeah, I think so too.
But it's in the same way that you're saying it's not like immediately compelling to yourself. Like I agree. I think that feeling is probably illusory in and of itself, and that well, I mean, I really loved your term, the cultural blind spot, because we know through like linguistics and other avenues of cultural investigation that uh, people can have feelings about the world that are shared on the cultural level that have no relationship to reality. So,
Right.
for example, if you speak a gendered language, that affects how you perceive certain features of the objects to which you attribute those genders to. So, like, if in your language a bridge is described as masculine, then you tend to also attribute other masculine features to that bridge. Oh, it's strong, or it's very tough, or I don't know. I don't.
Right.
I have a hard time thinking about gendered language. I'm in the process of learning Spanish, and that's one of the hardest parts. Is like
Right.
tables are feminine, I guess. I don't know, but la mesa. But yeah, if in your language bridge is a feminine word, then you tend to also associate feminine aspects of, like, oh, the bridge is, like, I don't know, elegant, or
Right.
things like that. And so these and bridges aren't masculine or feminine. They just exist, and these are all like perceptions and values that we are like putting onto the bridge, and they don't really have a whole lot of explanation other than that, like, linguistic cultural level, where we're picking up these cues basically subconsciously from our environment, and then we repeat them. uh, but if you ask any of those people, like, is it really strong, like, is it really elegant, I mean, they'd probably be convinced, and they're not wrong to be
Mm-hmm.
convinced.
Yeah, no, I
They're
agree.
just
Yeah.
accurately representing the
Yeah.
cultural programming that they've received.
Talking about that cultural programming, though, because a second aspect is that, especially in pop culture and stuff, is that people only believe in free will when it's sort of convenient. And sometimes it's more convenient to be a determinist. Because, for an example, if you look at your average movie or sitcom and someone did something horrible and they feel really bad, that's the moment where people start saying, oh, you couldn't have known that, you couldn't have done any better, you did the best you could. that's when people start to say, that's where people become more determinist, or when
Uh,
people are really in love, it was always fated to happen, and it was always, so it
uh,
depends also on cultural setting and the moment and the context if someone really believes in free will. Sometimes it's more poetic to not believe in free will.
I love that. That's and I don't have any evidence for this. I've maybe you can help me track some down or something. This is like an intuition that I have, just
All right.
based off of experience I've had. Um, but my intuition is that the more individualistic cultures are more attached to the idea of free will, and the more collectivist cultures tend to see the relationships between behavior and environment. And I think there's some, like, I don't know, general evidence that I've seen that kind of suggests that, but I wouldn't want to make like a hard claim out of it. But
Right. Yeah. Same here. I don't know of any concrete evidence of that, but my general experience seems to be, because I'm also very much into meditation. And if you look at a lot of the meditation teachers in the East, some of them, they don't even have a specific word for free will in their own native language, right? So
right.
um, when you ask someone like that a question and you use the term free will, they kind of respond like, "Oh, you read this in some book or somewhere," you know. Yeah, sort of already are reluctant, because that's not really a terminology that some of those people utilize a lot. And yeah,
Yeah,
I've
yeah,
also heard things where yeah, what you say, in more collectivist cultures, um, sort of the collective freedoms are of more importance than you having this free will by which you, um, you know, a good example is perhaps if you see a Dutch ice skater uh, win a race. There's a very high chance that they're going to talk about how hard they worked and how happy they are and how great everything went and stuff like that. And if you see an ice skater from China or something like that, they have a bigger chance of immediately going to my trainer, my family, my you know.
right.
And if you have less um, less desire to get all this credit for your achievement, if you're yeah, if your mind just doesn't work like that, then it becomes a lot easier. I think a lot of it also has to do with I shape my life, I'm in control, I'm doing everything, and I can shape my future and everything. And it's like, yeah, you can still plan and do all of these things, right? Like you can
Yeah.
still,
In
you
fact,
have causal influence on the world. You're not
yeah,
just a passive,
you can't
you
help but
know.
do that stuff. Like,
Yeah,
you're
you
gonna
can't
do it.
help but, yeah. And also viewing yourself as an open system that can change by the next causes that happen, which can be a conversation or a situation you find yourself in, or an email that comes in, whatever the case is. Viewing yourself as open to influence like that gives you more ability to change, to not have this sense of, this is how I am, I'm this type of person.
Right.
um, that becomes less of a problem. In my view, that
Yeah.
becomes less of a struggle, because there is no way to know how much the next conversation that we have is going to change us.
Yeah,
So yeah.
I think I definitely see myself as more influenced by environment than a lot of other people that I see, you know, going around society. And the term that keeps popping up in my head is like, you know, the fundamental attribution error,
Right.
where like you're more likely to attribute things to, you know, like internal causes, or like that you like generated some effect. And
Right.
um, I think just from the information I've been exposed to, I'm if you can err on the other side of that, I'm probably more likely to err on the other side of that. And until I'm like, I don't know, mad at someone and being biased and like
Right.
and then
Right.
I'm like, I'm being inconsistent in that moment. But that's also just, I don't know, who I am. Like
Right. Also,
and I
I don't
notice it and
even
I work
think
on it.
it's inconsistent, because also realizing that you're a biological organism and that there's no magic involved in our thoughts and actions, um, I don't think um, I think it's a misconception that emotions won't arise. Like, these are causal states of your nervous system still, and
Absolutely.
it's like, yeah, you're still going to get angry. Um, it's just that now it's worse because you don't have any rational justification for your sort of moral anger you have against this other person, right? So
Yeah.
the thing you can do is just you know, take a deep breath and you
Yeah.
know, it's not like your emotions also aren't valid. You can be sad for stuff that happens to you, stuff that other people do. You know, these are just emotional states. That's just part of being a human being. It's not that those stop to happen once you become a free will skeptic. It's not like you just go like, okay,
You just
you
turn into
know,
a robot.
yeah, it's not like you become this extreme pacifist celibate monk that's just like, you know,
That's
it's like,
We're not
yeah,
gonna
you get
get anyone
angry.
to join our position if you become a celibate monk. Like, like no one's signing
Yeah,
up
but
for that.
but the thing is still like, it's still like, for an example, people ask questions like, well, how do you deal with that, it's like, I can't punish criminals, I can't teach my children if they do something wrong because they couldn't have done
I
otherwise.
must spank them. I
Yeah.
must.
and it's like first of all, I'm 27. I don't know anything about having children. But if I
Right.
had to say something about it, I would say, if your child does something wrong, say that's a bad behavior rather than you're a bad person for
Right.
this
Right.
behavior. And know that correcting someone and explaining why this correction was useful is what causality means. It's you're helping a person to not repeat a particular behavior that way. Um, that's what it means to, that's what that it's so weird because it's so normal once it's weird that we live in a world that this is very difficult for a lot of people, because it's sort of like, you're a biological organism. We live in a universe based on a particular set of laws, right? And we are still agents. We still exist. Like, people still exist. We still do things. We can still interact with the world. It's not, and even for the people who don't feel as if they have free will, it's not like what we're saying is we're just looking at our lives as it's through a window. Like, we're not distant, like, we're still immersed in our experience.
Right. Right.
Um, it's just that I'm not. Um, I just don't live my life on the assumption that the atoms in my body can do something fundamentally different than all the other atoms in the entire universe. Red flag. And that's, that's basically what it is. It's not a it's not such a leap, right? It's also not a new idea. So it's so strange to me that some people are so blown away by the concept Um,
Yeah, I
yeah,
think it's just kind of, I know we mentioned earlier in the conversation, it's almost kind of a hidden discussion. And so I think that's the difficulty. And we kind of like we carry around all kinds of like evolutionary baggage in our bodies that cause
right.
them to not react optimally to the present environment. I think there's so much cultural baggage that
It is.
really makes the conversation like difficult to proceed through, and really you know, some people really seem just kind of locked into that framework, and you really have to be able to ask some really deep questions about like your perception and your cultural biases. And it's really difficult to I don't know, to get to, I don't, this is a biased way of phrasing it, but like what I would consider like an honest level of discussion.
Right.
It's just for some people it's a real challenge. And I don't know, it makes me think, I don't know what your feelings are about this, but it makes me think that we almost need a deeper like reinvention of culture to be able to really grasp what's going on with our bodies and with our subjective experience. Because I think the baggage is so heavy in some circumstances, kind of like with, you know, the bridges being feminine or masculine. Like the culture is so heavy that it's really
Right.
hard to say no, it's just a bridge, it's not a feminine bridge or a masculine bridge. And
Right. Right. Yeah. What I feel about that is, well, I think Yuval Noah Harari has a lot of useful things to say about this, and at least he proposes lots of ways to think about it, and also he gives some more sensible, more educated guesses of what we can expect in the future.
man,
Uh,
he's excellent. Just to
yeah,
like throw that out there, I went through his 21 Lessons and Homo Deus, and I didn't read Sapiens, but I sat through his YouTube lecture series on Sapiens.
right,
And I think, you know, obviously no one's perfect, and I heard
sure.
some things that I was, you know, a little iffy about, but for the most part, I know this is someone that's putting out a very necessary and comprehensive narrative about the world, and asking, in my opinion, like a lot of really important questions, like a whole
Yes.
pile of really important questions. I
Yeah,
love it.
he is at the forefront also because he has, you know, such a big following, because he has all these bestsellers out, and I think we see a change in that. What you said about the hiddenness of this discussion, I think recently that's been changed a lot. Perhaps Sam Harris's book sort of kickstarted that. But yeah, we now have um, more and more high profile people talk about it, and you know, educational YouTubers are picking it up.
Hmm.
You know, it's on the Joe Rogan Experience. Very big platforms are now talking about it, which I think is a good thing. I think the change in that uh, is very promising, and I hope it continues, and I hope more people talk about it more. Um,
Yeah,
uh,
um, I think maybe the reason why it seems to me that there's progress being made in the conversation, and I think at least one reason for that, where you've had a conversation that's kind of been at a stalemate for the longest time, like I mean literally thousands of years, like a couple thousand years maybe, or I don't know,
yes.
maybe more. I don't really
Right.
know the history that well, but
People, by the way, sorry to interject, but people love to bring this up. They love to bring this up. It's, oh, it's a debate of thousands of years.
yeah,
So that's also used as a way of saying this is an ancient debate, and now there are some folks claiming to know the answer, right? Like
right.
as if that's impossible. But um, most scientific discoveries have been, you know, what, you know, and we've been mistaken about things for many hundreds of years, you know what I mean?
Oh
It's
yeah,
like
I
that,
mean,
just because we made a mistake many times, right, like doesn't it doesn't mean that therefore it can't be corrected somewhere, and also you don't have to be the next Einstein to figure it out necessarily. That's just not just because the problem is old, right?
Yeah.
It's just that now we live in a different time with self-driving cars, and we have just different ways of thinking about these things.
Oh yeah.
And my problem is is like there is supporting evidence from neuroscience, and I think even if that didn't exist, I still would be a free will skeptic. But that
Same.
evidence has gotten better and better and better over time. And when we improve the ways of measuring, we improve the accuracy of the measurements. And this has been going on now since the 80s. So that's a thing that's there. I don't find the theories that claim to have evidence of free will that I came across very convincing, and also didn't find them all to be all that understandable. I think Sam Harris pointed out that no one in history has ever presented a mechanism for how free will should operate with the laws of physics. And it's just that, to me, it seems to be incompatible with what we know about neuroscience. It seems to be incompatible with what we know about physics. It seems to be
Absolutely.
incompatible with what we know about biology. And then for the longest of times, there have been logical arguments against free will that don't have strong rebuttals. It's not a secret, even for philosophers, that determinism is really hard to refute, for example.
I think that's why so many move to compatibilism. Like I don't
Right.
like I'm not intimately familiar with the philosophical literature on this. Like I don't read the journals or whatever.
No, that's
But
fine, but elaborate. Like, why?
but
Yeah, the
but it
compatible.
seems the impression I get is that compatibilism is kind of the popular position, and it's due to the fact that um, determinism's like not really refutable in like a strong sense. Like we talked about like the indeterminism that may be involved in the universe, but the sense that I get is that uh, for the most part, philosophers have stopped defending libertarianism because they can't make sense of it. And
I
so,
don't know. There's still a few, very
so
very determined libertarians. Pardon the
I've
pun.
definitely heard a determined libertarian. I've definitely heard a presentation from a professional philosopher on libertarianism, and I could not understand it. Um,
Right. Yeah.
but what I was
It's
getting at
yeah.
earlier is just that I think the internet is playing such a big role in correcting so many assumptions that were otherwise hidden by cultural bias, like cultures that were in isolation
Right.
of specific types of information. And now that information is just like wide open, and we can have conversations like this. And I think it's one reason why we should expect a lot of advancement in our understandings of culture. Now, of course, there's like I'm also seeing like this obvious cost with everyone being linked up. It means ignorance spreads just as fast or faster than the quality information. Because we have like this whole thing in the US, the QAnon conspiracy that's like mind-blowingly ignorant and mind-blowingly popular. Um,
Okay. What is that?
oh my goodness. I,
I'm I'm
I
actually not familiar with
I'm
it,
so sorry to even bring it up. It's
but
I'm not going to do it justice. It's so strange. It's basically this like internet conspiracy amongst Trump supporters that Trump is actually in the White House to fight against the deep state and these like globalist satanic
right.
pedophile people. Like, I mean, really, it's kind of a rehashing of previous conspiracies with just new skin put on it, and with
Right.
Trump being the savior. But it involves the most outlandish claims and the wild and simultaneously the wildest ignorance. So I only bring it up to present it as a sort of counterbalance from the counterbalance to this progress that I'm seeing in so many other conversations, like deep, profound, what I perceive to be progress. It seems like it comes at a cost, and I don't. I'm afraid what the consequences are.
Right.
You
I
know,
don't
how do you
know. I don't
not that ignorance?
know. Like you know, I sort of get what you're saying, but when it comes to this whole social media thing, I also think that this is sort of a necessary stage of, you know, there's gonna be something else eventually, right? Like right now we're sort of getting into this technology thing for real, and internet connected
Right?
everyone, and you know, that just has some stumbling blocks and some things that we didn't really you know, prevent before they occurred, and now we're sort of in this weird space where some of the internet is very toxic, some of the internet is very useful. I just think that that's a necessary struggle and it's just a
Yeah,
necessary thing we have to go through. But
I definitely see it
about
as
those
kind of.
big about those big cultural issues and how to solve all of those, I don't have a lot of
Come on,
very confident
what's the
ideas
answer, Roy?
there.
Come on now.
It's like, no, yeah. I also think you might be a bit more optimistic than me. I might actually,
Probably,
I,
probably. I have to
I
be.
might be a little bit more pessimistic. You know, I support everyone who wants to give it a good old try, right? You know, but I'm sort of inherently pessimistic when it comes to these making the world better in big ways. You know, I'm working on it too, but I don't know. I just don't want to get myself too happy too early. It's just
That would be
too happy to
terrible.
get disappointed. You
No,
know,
no, but you bring up Yuval Harari, and I think that's one of the reasons why he's such a relevant voice in the moment. Is
right,
he talks a lot about, you know, our cultural myths and how they're clashing with our technological development, and like he's warning us about like not only the downsides in the moment, but like, man, if we don't get our act together, um, these contradictions that put us in these like wild conspiratorial narratives, like they're only going to grow. And you know, when corporations can actually like not only manipulate you by like your clicks and your notifications and stuff, but actually like hack into your actual biology, and and meanwhile, if that's a world in which you still believe you're a freely acting, you know, self-causing agent, like, and corporations are actually running your life,
right.
that's just wild. That's like, uh, you know,
Like
there's
one
the
thing I want
sci-fi.
to
Oh yeah, go ahead.
one thing I want to say about that is that you know, when Juval speaks, he is pretty nuanced, and that nuance sort of disappears when people talk about him, and then his ideas sound a bit stranger, right? So when he talks about that, when he talks about sometimes hundreds of years of time,
Right.
right, where this technology is so advanced that corporations, you know, measure our blood pressure way better than we could, and they know how our whole biology works, and your phone can diagnose. You know, he's talking about a little bit further in the future stuff, but even right now, if you think about, the more you believe in free will, the more you are open to be manipulated, is a point Yuval made, which also is already applicable now. If and I think that um, there's very good reasons to believe that he's right about this, because if you believe that you are the ultimate cause of your thoughts and actions and the things you do in your day-to-day life, as long as you're convinced of that, and you are not noticing other causes that might be influencing you, then you become very easy to manipulate. In a laboratory, we can make someone like someone better based on the beverage they hold. So if they
Right.
hold a warm drink, they attribute a more warm personality to the person they talk to, and if you ask them, they always have some story to tell about why they think it, and almost has never has a relationship to the actual variables
Yeah,
in the
they don't
experimental
suspect the
setting.
cause, like, or I
Right.
mean,
And sometimes the causes are very obvious, right? So, and once you are never trained to see all the causes that constantly influence your behavior, then you're not going to notice the way companies um, strategize their marketing around you at all. Just on a very basic sense. I mean, it's not like when you become aware that there's no such thing as free will, that commercials will stop working on you. Sadly, that's not
right.
in the cards, right? But just knowing that they work, that they really have an effect on you, and
Yeah.
that's why they put billions into it, and that's improving. Marketing is improving with the help of the most updated psychology we have,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And that's gonna continue. And I just feel like eventually, once this becomes more important in our everyday life, um, yeah, becoming more aware of these might be a useful skill to have. And the heuristic of just feeling like, well, I just went to the fridge because I wanted to, and I took the chocolate because I felt like it. That heuristic might not be sufficient uh, already anymore. And that's
Absolutely.
yeah, that's just how I think about it. Is just like, you know uh, sure, if there's something, if you want to say you have free will because you're not imprisoned right now, and you just have your autonomy, your frontal cortex is working, and you're not drunk, right? And if you want to call that free will, that's fine, right? I don't really have a huge problem with that. But I do have a problem once someone asserts that we have ultimate control, that sort of goes beyond physics and science. And I just think that is no longer a useful myth to
Yeah.
have.
I think
And
at that point we're setting ourselves up for failure and manipulation, like we've been talking about.
right. And also just on a social level, is because you wanted to ask also what kind of effect it has on my life, right? Like, if I'm with one of my close friends and they're not in the best of moods and they're really grumpy, right? Then if you really feel like, well, they're just now choosing to be a dick to me of their own free will, that's kind of like, what did I do? But if you understand that these are basically just sort of neuronal weather patterns, and that they will pass in a few seconds, and that just because someone didn't have their coffee and they're acting grumpy against you is not a reason to give that behavior right back, right? It just give, you just kind of get like, yeah, yeah. Sometimes it's just like, sometimes you just feel like that, man. Yeah, it's like totally
It's
understandable. And
relatable, yeah.
yeah, and
Like,
there's certainly a way to regulate your emotions, right? I mean, in healthier ways, right? We don't have to just spill our emotions all the time, because that's how we are caused to feel. But um yeah, again, like, emotional regulation, and just like self-regulation of your behavior is a very useful thing to have some skill in. But you don't need any freedom of will for that, to accomplish that, and
right,
to
right. You just kind of need the proper, education
yeah.
and a little bit
And
of patience with yourself, which is
yes,
difficult, but
yes, it's always difficult to have patience for yourself. But you have to, these emotions are going to arise. But then there is like, there's tools we have, things like mindfulness can step off of the emotion perhaps a bit sooner, and like you can train um your emotions, your intense emotions, having less of huge negative consequences in your life by acting in a way that's completely counterproductive. That's
Yeah,
something you can train and get better at, but training that and getting better at those types of skills is a causal process, and you have to put in that effort to get better at that, to be less reactionary. And
it's like
you
a
know,
muscle. You
yeah, it's a
you have
muscle
to
you can
work it out.
train, and it's not going to happen by accident. It's going to happen by causes.
You don't just choose to be muscular.
Yes, exactly, that's
Like,
exactly
I
what it
mean,
is.
otherwise I wouldn't look like this.
Exactly, that's what it is, right? And that's sort of also maybe a way to make it sort of a bit more lighthearted to people, is like, if you really had free will, would you wouldn't have a preference in music taste, right? Like, why would you do that to yourself? You would just prefer all music and
Right?
love it all equally as much, right?
Yeah,
And
you would be desiring the world as it is because you choose
yes,
to, because
yes,
that would be the best, like, individual, like, subjective outcome. Like,
yes. And if there truly was real free will, then I don't see how. I think everyone would be bisexual or pansexual, because why would you limit yourself in your dating partners if you can just choose of your own free will to prefer everyone, right?
to just open up the pool.
Yeah, man, let everyone in.
I mean,
And it's just like, we don't live in a world like that. People are also acting like they
that's
thought they
very
have free will, they had free will, and now these philosophers and neuroscientists are coming in and taking it away, right? But you're already living in a universe that's, you're already a biological organism that can't be it just can't happen. You're already living in that universe, sort of. It doesn't
right.
have to feel different even, right? So, I don't know who said it, but there's this quote about um, um, well, someone said, why do people say that it was very normal and natural for people to think that the sun went around the earth? And then the reply was, it was Schopenhauer, I guess. I don't know for
Oh,
sure. I'm sorry, the name.
no, perfect. You sent me that one. It's Wittgenstein.
Wittgenstein, yes, he said that. He said, and he asked, well, and his friend said, well, it looks as if the sun goes around the earth. And Wittgenstein responds with, well, what would it look like if the earth went around the sun? Why?
Exactly.
And the thing is, that's how it already looks right now. That's how our, the heliocentric model is real. And, and it's already what it looks like. And
Right. Yeah, it's
I
just
think the free will thing might be more similar than most people think. It's like, we're already living in a universe where there is no sort of woofly little spirit that goes in the neurons and has the attention before the brain starts up.
the
It's like,
homunculus or whatever.
yeah, it would be magic. It would be magic,
Yeah,
right?
no,
Like,
we're not talking about actually, like, changing the universe that we live in. We're talking about, like, a shift of metaphor, where you're going
right,
to be operating by metaphors that are hopefully, like, more accurate so that you get better results.
right. Like, it still comes back to there being no free will, because one of the most frequent thing people say, well, maybe there's a little bit of free will, right? But the thing is, no, there's zero free will, but that does not mean fatalism still,
Right,
right? Like,
right.
so, and that nuance is basically, sometimes I feel like these conversations are constantly about showing how there's zero libertarian free will, but how that does not equate to fatalism and defeatism and being sort of this passive thing moved by the universe, right?
It's hard to prevent that, like, extreme swing and, like,
Yeah,
get into the nuanced area. That's where a lot of people are. They only imagine, like, the extreme scenarios, and yeah,
yes,
there's so much ground in the middle where we can sort things out.
Exactly. Yeah, sure.
Um,
That's why I also like I don't have an extreme problem with compatibilism the way I have a problem with libertarianism, because um, I think compatibilists raise important questions regarding free will and moral responsibility and all this stuff. Um, and I think we mostly agree on how the world works, right? And the important thing for me is, if we don't have this libertarian free will and this feeling of being the author of our actions and intentions and thoughts and stuff, the implications of that are quite serious and quite positive. Um, that's why I also like that Greg Caruso also goes into optimistic free will skepticism. He has a very short, concise TED talk, The Dark Side of Free Will, in which he sort of explains in 10 minutes what the free will skeptic position is. And he goes a little bit into the public health quarantine model as well there. It's sort of a good starter for if you want to know what sort of the positive effects are of getting rid of the illusion of free will.
that's brilliant. Well, I feel like we've come full circle, and we ran longer than I intended to,
Yes.
but I was having a good time. So
Yeah,
I
me
just
too. It was fun, man. I feel like
yeah.
maybe the conversation was a bit all over the place,
Well,
but you
that
know,
yeah,
there's these different things that come to mind where you go like, "Oh, that's important. That's important."
right. Yeah, no, and just kind of just kind of meandering through this whole area and making people aware of like how broad a conversation it is. It's not a conversation with like no consequence. It actually um, this assumption that so many of us carry with us about how we work underlies almost everything in our lives, and so it's
Yes.
so important, and it has huge consequences for how we organize society, how we
Yeah.
treat other people.
Yeah,
Um,
the thing is, free will is just a concept that's doing a lot of work in our world. And I think what um, all the free will skeptic positions have in common is that everyone is just double checking, well, is that really justified? Should this concept really have that much weight in a lot of different concerns, from moral responsibility to the justice system, but also really on a social level. Um, People who get into a little bit of a fight, a little bit of a hostile verbal exchange, and never talk to each other for the rest of their life, out of just anger, out of it, and out of how much they blame this person, and how deeply unfair the whole thing is for them, right?
right.
These types of things are just pretty sad if you feel like, hey, you know what? Um, we were both in a bad mood. These things happen. They don't define us as a person. And we can just basically shake that off and really start over, because um, you are not you are not your behavior in this moment is not your entire personality, and it doesn't make you an evil person in the sense that most religious people talk about evil, um, and just this idea that there's just not a lot of mustache twirling evil people around, right? That's just not how it works. It's a too crude of an analogy. It doesn't apply anymore. We have more updated ways of talking about these things, and I think it matters beyond just it's not just a mere philosophical argument. Um, it's also an empirical question, for an example, about Homo sapiens and their abilities. um that's important. It's just important what's true. But second of all, yeah, all the implications we talked about are just a few of the important ones. um
Yeah.
and yeah, I just hope that more projects also like this one, what you're doing, start up. I think the more the better, for sure.
Definitely agreed. Yeah. I think that was very profound. Um, to kind of you give us a lot to chew on there at the end. Um, is
Yeah, I'm
there
just trying. I'm not like I'm not any ultimate authority of any of these things. Also, these are just basically my views, how I look at it, and what I think is the useful approach, and that's it basically.
Yeah, no, it was very helpful. Thank you so much for your time here.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
I are there any projects or groups? I know you're in the No Free Will group. You do a lot of work in there.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
present a lot of like very well organized information.
Thank you.
You
Yeah,
and
yeah. And
Trick.
The No Free Will group on Facebook by Trick Slattery has loads of information on it, and I post there frequently as well. Um, and there's going to be a YouTube channel eventually on my part as well.
Awesome, awesome.
So once that gets started, because I'm really focused on school right now, and I'm really focused on studying. So yeah, once I have some more free time, I will be more on YouTube too.
Good, good. Well, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and your
Yeah, no
information.
problem.
Uh, I just, I don't know, I really appreciate it. Had a good time. So yeah, yeah, check out the No Free Will group on Facebook. Also, this particular project, the Free Will Project, has a Facebook group. I will include links to those in the video description. And if you're still watching after all this time, thank you so much for your attention. And
Exactly.
I hope everyone
Yes.
has a beautiful day.